The camera stopped rolling, but nobody moved. Steve Harvey stood frozen in the center of the Family Feud stage, his microphone hanging loosely at his side. For the first time in 30 years of television, he had no words. Across from him, sitting in the front row of the audience, 92-year-old Rose Patterson held his gaze with eyes that somehow carried both infinite sadness and unshakable peace. "Steve," she had whispered moments before, her voice barely audible, but somehow reaching every corner of the silent studio. "I have one last wish." The weight of those 5 words settled over the room like a prayer, because everyone in that studio, from the camera operators to the competing families, still frozen at their podiums, understood that they were no longer part of a game show. They were witnesses to something sacred. Let me take you back to how we got to this moment. How a routine Tuesday afternoon, taping became the day that changed everyone who was there. It was 2:30 p.m. at the Steve Harvey Studios in Atlanta. The autumn sunlight streamed through the high windows, casting golden rectangles across the polished floor. The energy was electric, as it always was during Family Feud tapings. 2 families faced off at their respective podiums. The Martinez family from San Antonio and the Patterson family from rural Georgia. The Patterson family was impossible to miss. 6 generations clustered together in the front 2 rows of the audience, spanning ages from 8-year-old little Emma to 92-year-old Rose. The family matriarch, Rose, sat in the center of the front row, a tiny woman in a powder blue dress that her granddaughter had picked out specially for the occasion. Despite her frail appearance, there was something regal about her posture, something that commanded attention without demanding it. Steve had noticed Rose immediately during the pre-show meet and greet. While other audience members had chatted excitedly about the game, asked for selfies, and shared their hopes of being selected to play, Rose had simply smiled and nodded politely. But when Steve knelt down to introduce himself, she had taken his hand in both of hers. "Mr. Harvey," she had said in that soft Georgia accent, her voice like autumn leaves, "I've been watching you for 15 years. You remind me of my late husband, Thomas. He had your same kind heart." Something in her tone, the way she held his hand, just a moment longer than necessary, had made Steve pause. "Well, Mrs. Patterson, that's about the finest compliment a man could receive." Rose had smiled then, and Steve had noticed how her eyes crinkled at the corners, how they held stories of 9 decades lived fully. "You take care of people, Steve. That's a gift." The conversation had lasted maybe 2 minutes, but it stayed with Steve as he prepared for the show. There was something about Rose Patterson that felt different. Not the excited energy of most audience members, but a calm certainty, as if she knew something the rest of them didn't. The Patterson family had been selected to compete after a spirited round of questions from the audience. Rose's daughter Margaret, her son-in-law David, her granddaughter Sarah, her grandson Michael, and her great-grandson Tyler took their places at the podium while Rose remained in the audience, beaming with pride. The game progressed beautifully. The Patterson family was quick-witted and entertaining, exactly the kind of contestants that made for great television. Steve was in his element, cracking jokes about Tyler's answers, playfully teasing Margaret about her competitive streak, and working the crowd with his signature blend of humor and warmth. But during the 3rd round, something shifted. Steve had just asked the survey question, "Name something people save up for their whole lives." Sarah Patterson had given a solid answer, retirement, which earned 23 points and sent the family into celebration mode. As the applause died down and Steve prepared to move to the next contestant, he glanced toward the audience and saw Rose. While everyone around her was clapping and cheering, she sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Their eyes met across the studio. Rose gave him the slightest nod, so subtle that anyone else might have missed it. But Steve saw it, and something in that small gesture made his chest tighten with an emotion he couldn't name. The game continued. The Martinez family mounted a comeback. The audience roared with each new answer. Everything was proceeding exactly as it should. But Steve found himself glancing repeatedly toward Rose, drawn by something he couldn't explain. It was during the fast money round that everything changed. Tyler Patterson, Rose's great-grandson, was at the podium, trying to score the final points his family needed to win the $20,000 grand prize. The tension in the studio was palpable. One more good answer would secure victory. Name something that makes a perfect day, Steve read from his card, his voice carrying the excitement of a potential big win. Tyler thought for a moment, then smiled. Spending time with family. The answer was perfect. It scored 32 points, putting the Patterson family over the top. Confetti fell from the ceiling. The theme music swelled. The family rushed from the podium to embrace each other in celebration. But as the chaos of victory unfolded around him, Steve's attention was drawn once again to Rose. While her family celebrated just feet away from her, she remained in her seat, not celebrating, not crying tears of joy, just watching him with that same peaceful expression. And then she stood up. It wasn't dramatic. Rose simply rose from her seat, using the armrests for support, and began walking slowly toward the stage. The celebration continued around her, but Steve watched her approach, and something in his chest began to tighten. She reached the edge of the stage area and stopped, looking up at him. The music was still playing. Her family was still embracing. The cameras were still rolling. But Rose Patterson, 92 years old and barely 5 feet tall, commanded the attention of everyone in that studio, without saying a word. Steve walked toward her, leaving his mark on the stage, leaving the celebration behind. When he reached the edge where she stood, he knelt down so they were eye level. "Mrs. Patterson," he said, his voice lower now, stripped of the game show energy. "Everything okay?" Rose looked at him for a long moment, her blue eyes bright and clear. When she spoke, her voice was steady, but it carried a weight that seemed to pull all the air out of the room. "Steve," she said, "I have one last wish." The celebration behind them gradually quieted. The music faded. The Patterson family, still clutching their oversized check, turned to see their matriarch standing at the stage edge, holding Steve Harvey's complete attention. "What can I do for you?" Steve asked, and everyone who heard him knew that he meant it completely. Rose reached into her small purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Her hands trembled slightly as she unfolded it. "This is from my doctor," she said simply. "I have maybe a week left. The cancer has spread everywhere it can go." The studio fell into absolute silence. The kind of silence that feels heavy, sacred. Steve's face changed, the performer's mask slipping away to reveal the man underneath. "Tomorrow is my 93rd birthday," Rose continued, her voice growing stronger rather than weaker. "And my only wish, my very last wish, is to spend it with people who feel like family. I know that sounds strange, coming from someone you just met, but watching you all these years, listening to how you talk to people, how you care about them, I feel like I know you, like you're part of my family too." Steve Harvey, who had hosted thousands of hours of television, who had faced every possible situation a game show could present, found himself in completely uncharted territory. But what happened next revealed why Steve Harvey isn't just an entertainer. He's a human being who understands that some moments transcend television. Steve stood up slowly and turned to address the entire studio. His voice, when he spoke, carried an authority that silenced even the most distant conversations. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "I need everyone to understand something. Mrs. Rose Patterson just shared something with us that's more important than any game we could ever play. Tomorrow is her 93rd birthday, and she's asked to spend it with family. Well, Miss Patterson, I think that can be arranged." He turned back to Rose and, without hesitation, stepped down from the stage to stand beside her. "Rose, would you honor us by letting us sing to you, right here, right now?" Rose's composure, which had remained steady through her revelation, finally cracked. Tears began to flow down her cheeks, but she nodded. Steve turned to the audience, to the two families, to the crew members and camera operators who had stopped working to watch this unfold. "Everyone who wants to be part of Rose's birthday celebration, I need you to gather around." What happened next was pure magic. The Martinez family abandoned their podium and walked across the stage. The Patterson family, still holding their celebration check, formed a circle around their grandmother. Audience members rose from their seats and moved closer. Camera operators left their equipment. Producers emerged from the control booth. Within minutes, Rose Patterson stood in the center of a circle that included nearly 200 people, all of them looking at her with expressions of love and respect. Steve took Rose's hand gently in his. "Rose," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "We're all family here, and family sings happy birthday together." He began to sing, his rich voice filling the studio. "Happy birthday to you." One by one, every voice in that room joined in. The harmony was imperfect, spontaneous, and absolutely beautiful. As they sang, Rose closed her eyes and swayed slightly, a smile spreading across her face that seemed to light up the entire room. "Happy birthday, dear Rose." The cameras kept rolling, but this was no longer television. This was humanity at its most pure. 200 strangers celebrating the life of a woman they had just met, honoring her final wish with the kind of love that transcends every boundary. "Happy birthday to you." The song ended, but nobody moved. Rose opened her eyes and looked around the circle, at all the faces surrounding her, each one reflecting back the joy she was feeling. "Thank you," she whispered, and somehow everyone heard her. "This is perfect. This is exactly what I wanted." But Steve wasn't finished. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his personal business card, not a prop, but his actual contact information. "Rose," he said, "I want you to keep this. And I want you to know that every year on November 15th, wherever I am in the world, I'm going to think about this moment, about you, about what you taught us today, about what really matters." Rose took the card with trembling hands. "What did I teach you, Steve?" Steve's voice broke slightly as he answered, "That love doesn't require a lifetime to be real. That family isn't just about blood. And that the most beautiful moments happen when we stop performing and start connecting." He paused, looking around at the circle of people still surrounding them. "You brought all of us together, Rose. You made us all family." Then Steve did something that no one expected. He began to remove his suit jacket, the navy blue jacket that had become part of his television persona. He slipped it off and, with infinite gentleness, draped it around Rose's small shoulders. "Happy birthday, Rose," he said. "From your television family." Rose pulled the jacket close around her. It was enormous on her tiny frame, but she wore it like a queen's robe. "I'll treasure this," she said. "And I'll think of all of you when—" She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Everyone understood. The circle began to break up slowly. Reluctantly, people hugged Rose, whispered birthday wishes, shared brief moments of connection. The Martinez family, who had lost the game but gained something infinitely more valuable, each took a moment to wish her well. As the crowd dispersed, Steve knelt down beside Rose, one more time. "Rose," he said quietly, "is there anything else? Anything at all?" Rose looked up at him, still wrapped in his jacket, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Just this, Steve. Promise me you'll remember that what you do matters. Not just the laughs, not just the entertainment, but the way you make people feel. Seen, heard, loved. That's your real gift." Steve nodded, his own eyes wet. "I promise." The episode aired 2 months later, but it wasn't the version anyone expected. Instead of the usual game show format, the network aired the raw footage of Rose's birthday celebration. No commercial breaks, no editing for time, just the pure, unfiltered moment of human connection. It became the highest-rated episode in Family Feud history. Not because of drama or comedy, but because viewers recognized something increasingly rare in their world: authentic love between strangers. Rose Patterson passed away peacefully 6 days after the taping. Surrounded by her family, she was wearing Steve's jacket. At her funeral, which Steve attended, her granddaughter Sarah shared that Rose had spent her final days talking about her television family, about the birthday celebration that had exceeded her wildest dreams, about the kindness of strangers who had become dear friends in the space of a song. Steve spoke at the service, his voice steady but emotional. "Rose taught us that family isn't limited by blood or time or circumstance. Family is what happens when hearts connect, when strangers choose to love each other, when someone's joy becomes everyone's joy." The suit jacket was buried with Rose, but its impact lived on. Steve established the Rose Patterson Foundation, dedicated to granting final wishes for elderly patients in hospice care. The foundation's motto, taken from Rose's words to Steve, reads simply, "Family is what happens when hearts connect." Every year, on November 15th, Steve takes a moment during his show to remember Rose Patterson. He tells her story to new audiences, reminds them about the importance of treating strangers like family, of recognizing that everyone we meet is carrying something precious that deserves our respect and love. And in hospitals and hospice centers across the country, elderly patients receive visits from volunteers trained to listen, to connect, to remind people in their final days that they are not alone, that they are loved, that their lives have mattered. Rose Patterson's last wish became a legacy that continues to spread love in ways she never could have imagined. Her final birthday celebration didn't just bring together 200 people in a television studio. It created a ripple effect of compassion that continues to touch lives years later. Because sometimes the most powerful moments happen when we stop following scripts and start following our hearts. Sometimes a 92-year-old woman's simple wish can teach an entire world about the true meaning of family. And sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone is the assurance that they are loved, remembered, and valued. Steve Harvey learned something that day that changed how he approaches every show, every interaction, every moment he spends in the public eye. He learned that his real job isn't to entertain people. His real job is to remind them that they matter, that they belong, that they are part of something larger than themselves. Rose Patterson's story became more than just a television moment. It became a reminder that love shows up in the most unexpected places, sometimes wrapped in a game show host's jacket, sometimes spoken in the trembling voice of a woman celebrating her last birthday, sometimes sung by 200 strangers who chose to become family for one perfect sacred moment.